Hey everyone, welcome to Studio Review. It's Kyle, and in this video, we're going to be going over Restaurant Menu Continued. The goals of the studio were to expand on the classes that were created in the last studio, be able to explain our ideas to another classmates as we expand upon these classes, as well as create a restaurant menu from those final classes. Before we dive into this, let's review what we did last time. We created two classes, the first being the menu item, that had 5 different properties: name, description, price, etc., as well as another class called menu that had the list of those menu items, as well as a property called last updated. In this studio, we're going to do it just like the last one, where we're going to design our idea first and then implement second. So get out that pen and paper because we're going to start jotting down ideas. One more thing to note, that this is a group studio. So we're going to be working with a fellow coder to come up with ideas and collaborate to come to a common solution. So let's dive into the studio. We're going to look at our first task, which we're given multiple actions that we need to make methods for. These are those actions. Let's look at the first one. We need to add and remove menu items from our menu. Now, before we start solving this task, I want to note that I'm going to be writing my solution in pseudocode. Pseudocode is essentially the in-between layer between Java code or another development language and plain old English. It's a way for people who might not have a coding background to be able to understand what our idea will be when we actually write a coding solution. In other words, it's code in its most simplistic form. So I invite you to observe this as I'm creating a solution for our first action, which is going to be adding. We want to add menu items to this menu. So the first thing I'm going to do is create the add menu item method. That's going to take in menu item as a parameter. I know that when I take in a new menu item, I need to add it to my list of menu items. So my next line of pseudocode would be list of menu items dot add, and then I add that menu item. This is a very simplistic example of pseudocode. As we can see, this does not look like Java. It looks like a very dumbed down version of the language, which essentially it is, which might make it easier to understand if you don't have a strong Java background or coding background at all. One more thing we're going to add to this add menu item method. If we take a look back at the classes we made before, we see that we're adding a menu item to that list of menu items in menu, but we also have this property here called last updated. This is very important because last updated is supposed to have the date and time of when we last updated our menu. So therefore, looking back at our add menu item, if we add a menu item to it, technically we updated our menu. Therefore, we should update our last updated property or class variable with that current date and time that we did it at. Now, if you squint really hard, you can kind of see how we're going to implement this in Java. It's not that far off. Pseudocode is again meant to be that step right before we translate our idea here that we have into an actual programming language. Furthermore, I'm going to add this method into the menu class when we're finally done. So on your pen and paper, feel free to jot down this solution because we're going to need it here in the near future. So let's move on. The next thing we need to do is write a method to remove menu items from our menu. In that case, I'm going to do just like I did before, and I create the method remove menu item that takes in the menu item to remove. I needed to remove it from that list of menu items, so my next line of pseudocode be list of menu items.remove, and then remove that menu item. Once again, we're updating our menu here, so we need to update that last updated property with the current date and time that we did this at. Finally, just like the last method, we're going to add this to our menu class when we're finished. So again, jot down this solution because we're going to need it here in the future. Let's move on. Let's move to the next action. Tell if a menu item is new. In this one, we're going to continue with pseudocode. And the first thing we do is name our method, which I'm going to call isNew. And what it's going to do is return, is the menu item new? Now you might be asking yourself, how are we going to get this is menu item new property? Well, if we refer back to what we created last studio, we see that in our menu item, we have this isNew property. That's what we're referring to in this pseudocode. We're going to be returning this isNew property in this method that we're going to be creating. So looking back here, another thing you might have noticed is this word is in front of new. Where did I come up with this method name? Well, is commonly used in method names that return Booleans. So if it returns a Boolean, chances are it will start with the word is. Finally, we're going to add this method into the menu item class when we're finished. Let's keep going. Now we need to tell when the menu was last updated. As always, we start with our method name. In this case, I'll call it getLastUpdated. And I'm going to return the menu's last update. This might look like a getter to you. That's because this does have the qualities of a getter. So it's a good way to think of it. Finally, we're going to add this into the menu class when we're done. And that's it. Let's move on. Now we need to print out both a single menu item as well as the menu. So this is asking two things. Let's start with one and move on to the other. Let's talk about printing out a single menu item. We start with the method name, print out menu item. And then I know menu item has 5 properties or class variables that I can print out to the screen. Therefore, in my pseudocode, I just say I'm going to print out these 5 properties or class variables. And that's it. That's all we need. We'll add this into the menu item class when we're done. So the second part to this action is to print out the menu. So as always, we start with that method name, print out menu. And we need to print out all the menu items within our menu. So a common way to do that is that we're going to loop through each menu item in the list of menu items. And then we'll call out to that print out menu item method we created above by saying menu item dot print out menu item, which in return prints out all of the items in our menu, which prints out our menu. Problem solved. So we'll add this into the menu class when we're done. So let's move forward onto the final action, determine if 2 menu items are equal. So we'll start with a function called isEqual because equal should return true or false. And I'll take in a menu item to compare. Now you might be asking yourself here, why am I only taking in 1 menu item here? Why do I not take in 2 so I can compare the 2? That's because remember, we're writing instance methods here. So what I'm going to do is compare this menu item that's being passed in as a parameter to the instance of the menu item that I'm currently in. So I can just call to those class variables or properties within this isEqual method to compare it to the menu item properties. We'll talk a little bit more about this deeper down into this method. First, let's start with the base case. We can't compare this menu item to our instances menu item if it's not a menu item. Clear and simple. Therefore, we need to check first if menu item is a menu item. If menu item is not a menu item, then we need to return false right away because we can't compare that. Once we know it's a menu item, then we can start comparing its properties. So the first thing we do is we say if item name, which is the class variable or property of our instance that we're in, equals menu item dot item name. Remember, menu item is that parameter that was passed into our equal method. If the item names are equal, that means we're closer to these 2 menu items to be equivalent. But we need to keep checking every property. So the next thing we check is the description. Is the instance's item description the same as the menu item that was passed in as the parameters item description? How about the item price in the category? We check that as well. If this is all equal, then we return true. The 2 menu items are equal. Otherwise, if something didn't match, then we return false. They're not equal. And when we implement this, we're going to put it into the menu item class. So there we go. We've created pseudocode, or our general idea of how we're going to code each of these methods. So once we're finished, we need to share a design. Find a fellow student and compare your designs. Remember to always keep an open mind. We don't always have the right ideas. We might have missed something. Therefore, collaboration with another developer can open insights that we might not have seen, leading to a better design. Once we have shared our design and come to a common conclusion, we put our finished product down on paper. In this case, in the menu class, we're going to have that add and remove menu item class that both take in a menu item as a parameter, our getLastUpdated method, and then our print out menu method. Over in the menu item class, we're going to be implementing that isNew method that returns true or false, and then our print out menu item method, and then finally that isEqual method that takes in a menu item as a parameter. So this is what we're going to be going forward with when we implement this into our Java code. So saying that, now it's time to actually implement our design. So first things first, we need to open the project from the last studio. That should be called Restaurant Menu. Luckily, I already have that open here. If you need a refresher on how to open this project, feel free to take a look at the past videos to see how we open a project in IntelliJ. The next thing we need to do is that we need to place our classes, that menu and menu item class that we created last studio, into a common package. From our directions, it says we wanted to create the restaurant package. So that's what we're going to do right now. We hop over to IntelliJ, we go into our source folder, and again, we see this menu and menu item class. We need to put these into a package called restaurant. So we right click on source, say new, package, and type in restaurant, and press enter. We can then copy both and then drag and drop them into restaurant. We will get this pop-up that says, do you want to refactor? You click refactor. And IntelliJ automatically moves menu and menu item into your new restaurant package. So this step is completed. So now we're ready to start implementing these methods into our classes. Now we have to pick which one do we want to start with, menu item or menu. I'm going to pick the less complex class, which is menu item. So we need to add those new methods into menu item. And as a reminder, these are the ones we're going to be adding. So the first one is new. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we come to the menu item class. I come down to the methods section, and I see I have my getters and setters. If we ever want to create other methods, we would put them down here, below the getters and setters. And I'm going to copy over that is new pseudocode. So here we go. We have the is new pseudocode. So what this is new method needs to do is just return the is menu item new class variable. So we have to make this connection in our head. What is the is menu item new class variable? Well, we know from our past conversations that this is new class variable is the one that's declared up here and set inside of our constructor. So what this is actually saying is that we need to return that this.isNew class variable or property. Now we need to ask ourselves, is there any place that we already do this? Some of you might have already seen that up here in our getters and setters, we're already getting the isNew class variable. So technically, this method has already been created for us. It's just named a little differently. But in your mind, you're probably thinking, Kyle, you just told me that if it returns a Boolean, it typically starts with is. And you're absolutely right. Get is new or is new are basically at this point saying the same exact thing. It's just common standard that most of the time, if it's returning a Boolean, we put is new. So what I'm going to do to change this is I'm just going to change our getter to is new. But I'm still going to have my set is new down here. So that's what I'm going to do to complete this task. Remember, if it's your strong preference to keep get in there, to keep it straight in your head, feel free to do that. This is just a small standard in Java that can be left to the developer to decide if they actually want to name their methods like this or not. So after that conversation, let's move on. So the next method we need to do is the print out menu item class. So we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about this one. So we have the print out menu item method that what it wants to do is just simply convert that menu item, that object, into a string, something human readable. So that might sound a little familiar to you. Let's take a closer look. If we created a menu item here called my menu item, and we just called it salad, and we just set its name to salad. To convert this to a string or convert any object to a string, you might be inclined to do the .toString method. .toString converts any object into its string representation. So in this case, if we were to look at what this returns, it would look something like this, menu item @ with a bunch of numbers behind it, which isn't the most human readable thing we've ever seen. So maybe we can explore this a little bit more to see how we can manipulate this toString method to do what we want it to do. So let's look at the toString method. Now, if we want to hijack this method, make it do whatever we want to do, we can write this method inside of our class, menu item, and tell the compiler that we want toString to do something different by adding something special to the top of this method. That being the @ override. This particularly is called an annotation. We can add these on top of these special methods like tostring to essentially customize it to how we want it to behave. Therefore, we'll place the code of how we want to return our menu item inside of this method. So let's go ahead and implement this tostring method now inside of our menu item class. We said that we want to put our other methods down here. How we create a tostring method, we say public string tostring. Then when we want to tell the compiler that we want to hijack this method and do what we want it to do, we put that @ sign and then override. So now we can put inside of this tostring method however we want to return this menu item. If we refer to our pseudocode, we see what we want to do inside of this method is to print out each of the class variables or properties of the menu item. So that's what we're going to do here. So I'm going to create a variable that says our return string. This is just an arbitrary variable name that I picked out. The first thing we need to do is print the item name. So I'm going to append the item name into this return string. Next, I want the name, description, price, etc. to be on its own separate line. So at the very end of this, I'm going to append a new line character. There we go. I'm going to copy this line and place it below into the description. I edited the line to now append the item description to my return string. And I'm going to do that now for price, category, and is new. Then finally, when we're done creating this return string, naturally, we have to return it because our tostring method wants a string returned to it. Perfect, we've created this tostring method. Therefore, finishing our print out menu item pseudo method that we created. So let's move on. The next one we're going to do is this is equal method that takes in a menu item into its parameters. So let's take a look at this one as well. If we have that is equal method that takes in a menu item as its parameter, well, what is this exactly saying? In essence, it wants us to compare two menu items. It wants to compare this menu item that's been passed into its parameters to our instance and its properties. So that might again seem familiar to something we've seen in Java before. So let's take a look at an example. Say we have a menu item that we create called myMenuItem, that its name is set to salad. And we have another menu item called myMenuItem2 that's also set to salad. In this example, both their names are salad, therefore these two should be equal. A common thing we did in Java to see if two objects were equal is that we use that dot equals method. So I'm going to set myMenuItem to dot equals myMenuItem2. Again, both their names are salad, so I should assume this to come back as true. However, it returns false. This is because the dot equals is by nature comparing the memory locations. But at this time, menu item and menu item 2 are stored at two different memory addresses. Therefore, they're not equal. So we want to change this. And what we can do is that just like the tostring method, we can hijack the equals method. And how we can hijack it once again is that we put the @ sign and then override, that annotation there, to say that we want to make this equals method do something different within our menu item class. So we place that code of how we compare those objects into here. Now I just said something really weird there, how we want to compare the objects. If we look into the parameters of the equals method, we see that we have to take in an object. But you might be asking yourself at this point now, what exactly is an object? And the answer is, it is one of the most generic or general data types that we can have in Java. Now, what do we mean by that exactly? Well, let's look at an example of something very general. Let's just say food. Food is a general word or a general label. Food can mean apple, tacos, cake. It has a lot of different representations it can take. Well, this is the same with objects. Object can mean multiple different things or assume the structure of multiple different things. In this case, it could be our dog class, an integer class, a scanner class. An object can be any of these things. It is a very generic data type that can take on different representations. So that means in that object parameter that we see above, we can pass in anything into those parameters. We can pass a dog in there, we can pass an integer in there, or a scanner in there, and then we have to check if it's equal to whatever our class is. So this makes this equals method super customizable, but it leaves us with a small bit of a problem. So let's go back, and we're going to implement this equals method here. So we come back over to IntelliJ, and one thing I want to show you is that we don't have to write out the method every single time. We know we have to implement that equals method here, but what we can do is we put @ override, then IntelliJ gives us this option, override / implement methods. Double click, click on equals, and it will write our equals method for us. So first things first, on most common equals methods, you might see this first line. It might be a little confusing at first, so stick with me. It says if obj equals this, then return true. So what exactly does this mean? Well, let's break it down. We know obj is an object coming in. We know this is the instance reference. So that means this is referring to whatever instance of menu item that we're currently in. And this double equals, we know, compares not values, but memory addresses. So what this conditional is looking for is, does the object coming in through the parameter and whatever instance of the class that I'm in have the same memory address? And we do this because we know if both memory addresses are the same, then that means they're the same object. So right off the bat, we know that obj is completely equal to our current instance. Now let's break that down a little bit more. Remember, our memory addresses is simply just like a neighborhood. All of our information has to live somewhere. If we created our menu item here in our code, immediately gets sent to a house in our neighborhood. In this case, it's at address 1. And we save our menu item with all of its information at that house. Now say we write the line of code, myMenuItem.equals myMenuItem. Well, we're seeing if myMenuItem is equal to itself. Of course, instinctually we're saying, yes, of course it's equal to itself, but we have to remember that it's doing something in the background. And what it's doing is that it's comparing, is myMenuItem equal to myMenuItem? In other words, is address 1 equal to address 1? And we know from our previous discussion, if they're both have the same memory address, they're the same object. Hence, we use those double equals to compare the memory addresses to see if they're the same object. So that's what we're doing on that line. Now what I'm going to do is paste the pseudocode that we wrote previously in our example. We know that the pseudo method name is now equals. So we move on to, if menu item is not a menu item, then we have to return false. Again, object can be a cat, a dog, or a menu item. We have to check what it is. And if it's not a menu item, we need to return false immediately. So how we do that is that we say if obj, the object in the parameter, is an instance of menu item. If it returns true, it's a menu item. If it returns false, it's something other. We need to check if it's not a menu item. So what we can do is that we put this exclamation point in front of all of this and wrap that in parentheses. What this exclamation point in the front of it means is the equivalent of saying equals false. That's its equivalent. Programmers will put the exclamation point in front of here in order to save some typing time. If you ever see that, that's what that exclamation point means. It says we need to return false. So on here, I'm going to return false. Perfect. This ask is done. So the next step we need to do is that we were going to have to compare our menu item and all of its properties to our instance. But one small conundrum that we have is that, remember, obj, the thing that's being passed in here, is not technically represented as a menu item, even though internally we do know it's a menu item in there. But in order to get all the properties inside of that menu item, we have to convert or cast our object into an instance of the menu item. Now, what does cast truly mean? It simply means just to transform that object that a menu item is hiding inside of into a menu item, just so we can access its properties. So let's do that. How we cast something is first we need to create the variable of the type that we want to cast it to. So we say menu item, because I want to cast it to a menu item. I'm just going to call it lowercase menu item. And then to cast it, I put parentheses in the class name I want to cast it to. So I say menu item. And then I say obj, the thing I want to cast. Perfect. The magic is happening. I'm magically casting object here into menu item. So now I can do these if statements. So to compare these properties, I need to say if menu item, that newly magically casted menu item above, dot name, and name is a string, I say equals. And now I want to put in here my instance name, which we can always grab those instance variables or those class variables by using this dot name. And that's how we compare to see if the names of our menu item that's been passed in as a parameter and our instance name are the same. But we have a few other things we need to do before we return true. We need to compare the item description. To say and, we put 2 ampersands, and then we do exactly what we did for the name, except with description. And then 2 more times. And at the very end, I put return true. Now, this seems like a pretty long line here and very hard to read if I had a smaller screen. So I'm going to put each and on a different line. There we go. I just formatted my if statement. Then it made that look a little bit prettier. So the final thing in our pseudocode that we need to do is otherwise return false. Otherwise, aka else, return false. Because if one of these was not equal up here, that means it's not the same menu item, and we need to return false. Down here, it's just more unreachable code. We're returning true or false from every single possible branch of code or possibility out of our method. So we don't need this down here, so we can just remove it. Our equals method has just been written. So it comes that time now, we have to test our code. If we need to test our Java code, then we need to create a starting point. To create a starting point, we always create that main method. Now the question is, where should we put that main method? Well, if we look a little closer at the details of our studio, it asked us that we need to put it inside a new restaurant class. So that's where I'm going to go put this. I'm going to create the restaurant class and put my main there. I come up here to restaurant, I right-click, new Java class, restaurant. Add it to my Git, and in here I'm going to put my main. I created my main, so now I have a starting point. Let's test out my starting point by printing out hello world. Perfect, it works. So now I want to create a menu item and see if those 2 main things that we just created actually work. So let's create 2 menu items. Okay, I'm going to put salad. So there you go, I created my first item, which is going to be a salad, and it is going to be new with a price of $7.50. I'm going to copy this line, paste it, and make a second item with the exact same properties here. So first things first, I'm going to test out the tostring method. Now remember, the tostring method only returns a string. It doesn't print it out to the screen. How we print something out to the screen is that system.out.println. So that's what I'm going to write first. Then I'm going to do item1.tostring. And let's run this. And perfect, just how we wrote our tostring method, it's now showing exactly how we want our information to be read. It's human readable. Great, let's test out that equals method. We run it, and it's true. Those 2 are equal. Let's create a third item that maybe isn't salad, but it's going to be cake. There we go, I created that. And now I'm going to do the exact same thing here. But with item 1, I'm going to compare it to item 3. I save that, and then I run it again. And now I see I'm getting back false. All right, so it looks like everything's working. Let's go ahead and move on. So now we have to go ahead and add those classes to the more complex class. We need to add the new methods to menu. As a reminder, here are the methods that we have to add to the menu class. Let's start with the first 2. Add and remove menu items. Going to IntelliJ, going to menu, I'm going to put these methods, again, below the getters and setters. The first one I'm going to do is the add menu item. So I say public void add menu item. I need to take in a menu item, so I put that into the parameters. And now in here, just like our pseudocode said, we need to add it to the list of menu items. That list of menu items is menu items. So we say this.menuitems dot add and then item. One last thing we need to do to the add menu items, as our pseudocode said, is that we need to update the last updated. To do that, we do this.lastUpdated equals new date. When we do that new date, it sets whatever our current time and date it is in this moment into the last updated class variable. So that's what this is doing. So this completes the add menu item method. So let's move on to the remove menu item method. To do that, we do the exact same. We call it public void remove menu item, taking a menu item as a parameter. In this case, we're going to remove the item from the list. To do that, we do this.menuitems.remove, and we pass in an object, the object that we wanted to remove. What this is going to do, it's going to go through each item of the list and see which item has the same reference or memory address as the item we just passed it in, and then remove that. That's how it removes something from the list. In other examples, I've also provided an index. Remember that methods can be overloaded to take in different parameters. In this case, we can provide the remove method here with an object or with an index, which is an integer. The next thing we have to do is update the last updated property. And we do that with the exact same line above. That completes this. Let's go back. The next method we're going to do is getLastUpdated, which, as you remember from our previous discussion, is a lot like a getter. So let's go ahead and implement this. Coming back to our code, it looks like in our previous studio, we implemented the getters and setters here. And it looks like we have getLastUpdated, exactly how we called it. So we actually don't need to even implement this method. It was implemented before. So we don't need to do anything here. The final method we need to do is the printoutMenu method. As we talked about previously, printoutMenu, or the printoutMenu item, we're going to override that tostring method. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to put it at the very bottom here. And again, in order for IntelliJ to help us, we're going to say @override and then double-click implement methods. Click the tostring, press OK, and it builds it for us. What we said in our pseudocode, we have to loop through each menu item inside of the list and print it out. So this is our pseudocode. And so let's start with the first one, for each menu item. Well, we've done that before. We can say for menu item, colon, and then this dot menu items. This is that for each loop that we need. So the next thing we need to do is print out that menu item. We know this one we've already built before. We have another tostring method within that menu item. But one thing we need to do is create a string, a return string like we did last time, to capture all of those tostrings that we're going to be calling. So let's start with that. Let's say string return string, initialize it to an empty string, and then come down here, and we're going to say return string plus equals, and then item dot tostring. As always, I want each item to be on its own line. So I'm going to put that new line character there. I'm actually going to put 2, so there's 2 lines there. Perfect. So instead of returning this super.tostring, we're going to return string here, just like that. Perfect. We just created our tostring method that prints out all of our menu items. So now we've completed each of these methods. So now we need to fully test out both of these classes we just made. So let's follow that checklist that they provided with us. We need to create several items and add them to the menu. Let's do that. We'll go to restaurant, and we've already created several items here. Let's go ahead and add these now to a new menu. We have to create a menu, so we say menu, my menu. Now we need to add each of these items. We use a newly created method called add menu item. And I'm going to do this now for item 2 and item 3. Let's make sure this still runs. So we run it, and it still runs. It doesn't give us any output, but at least it ran, so we know that there's no breaking errors here. So this task is done. Moving on, print the entire updated menu to the screen. Sounds good to me. Let's do that. How we can print something out to the screen is system.out.println, and then we take that menu, my menu, and then we do tostring. Let's run that. Now we see we get back 3 items whenever we print this out to the screen. So this task is done. Print an individual menued item to the screen. Well, we've done that before, but let's try that one more time. I'm going to comment out what we just did, and I'm going to print it out to the screen, system.out.println, and then item1.tostring. We run this, and it's been printed out to the screen. Perfect. This task is done. Delete an item from a menu and then reprint it. Sounds good. Let's go ahead and remove cake, just because we're going to open a healthy restaurant. So we added all of our menu items up here. Now we're going to remove it. I'm going to say item 3. Instead of printing out item 1 here, I'm going to comment that out and uncomment out this one. That's print out my menu. So now we should only get back 2 salads. So let's take a look. Perfect. We only get back 2 salads, working exactly how we want it. So this task is done. Therefore, our studio is done. Great job following through to the end here. I hope this cleared up a lot about classes. Thanks for working through this studio with me. The next is the bonus missions, so stay tuned if you'd like to work through those with me as well. So on to the bonus missions. So let's take a look at our task. So if a user tries and adds an existing menu item to our menu, we need to display a warning message. Not only that, but we need to prevent the duplicate from being added to the menu. So what we had to do here is identify where this would happen. Where are we adding menu items? And as we know, we're adding menu items inside of that add menu item method within our menu class. So talking a little bit in pseudocode, what are we going to add to this method? Well, we need to make sure that this menu item that's being added does not already exist inside the list of menu items. So what we should do is loop through each menu item in this list of menu items and see if menu item is equal to the item being passed inside of the parameter. If 1 is equal to that item that's being passed in, then we need to print the warning and get the heck out of this method, aka not add the menu item to the list of menu items. Because otherwise, if we don't find a match, then we just add the item. So let's do this. To do this, we have to implement it again in menu inside of that add menu item method. We need to loop through each item in the menu items array list. So this is our pseudocode we just discussed. We need to loop through each of the items in the menu items list and see if we find a match. If we do find a match, then we need to display a warning. Not only that, we also need to make sure we don't add it to the list. So first things first, let's make that loop. We've done this before. We can do that for each. So we say for menu item, and I'm going to call it just menu item. And then we get our list, this.menu items. So now we're looping through each of these menu items. Next thing we need to do is that we need to see if it's a match. So we say if item.equals menu item, then we need to do something. Remember that this dot equals is being used in the menu item class. It's going through that dot equals that we overrode over here. So this is helping us out now. We're doing something with this. So going back to menu, we need to display a warning if it found something that matched. So how we display a warning is that we do a system.out. And then as well, we need to not add it. How we cannot add it is simply just get out of this method that's trying to add it. So we say return. Return will get us out of this method immediately. Therefore, these lines will never be executed. Perfect. Let's test this out. Going back to restaurant, we're going to be adding 2 salads here that are very much identical. So when we add the second item, we should get that warning. Another thing to note is that I'm going to comment out removing the third item here. So we should get now back salad and cake. So let's run this. We get back salad and we get back cake. Not only that, we also get our warning. Everything we want to see. We've done this right. Awesome. Last but not least, make sure that you push your work here. You just did a lot of coding. You want to make sure it's all saved securely inside of your GitHub. So again, great job. We followed through to the absolute end. We did those bonus missions. Thanks for watching.